Okay, so hopefully continue a little more. I have some more ideas I want to express. Hopefully so. Thank you. So once again, we have these four types. We got these four types, or 16 if you want to look at it that way. And one thing I want to mention though too is I forgot to say that NFs, idealists, they tend to believe in things like aliens, once again, supernatural types of things. They like conspiracy stuff. Interestingly, the alien stuff, even that fits the form, but they're into that type of stuff. Also, they like to clean. They always are talking about having an empty space. They say things like I want an empty space of possibilities, stuff like this. They like things clean. They like to cook a lot, to help people out. They're into stuff like this, usually. And like I said, they're into global issues and helping the environment, stuff like this. The communistic ideas, they like that type of stuff. Liberal. My grandma just said liberal. But like I said, they're extremely intelligent and they just have this sense. They can just sense things. And sometimes I used to think, wow, they don't know what they're talking about, or like, what does he really believe that? But then I listen, and amazing things they say, amazing things. But one thing I want to say too is, idealists, they'll often talk about spiritual things. Like they'll say, they believe in things like, you can meditate things with your mind, and you can, levitate if you do enough of, some people say they're gullible. But they tend to believe in stuff like this. A lot. And they say things like, everything is energy and we're all just spiritual beings. But, they're into spirituality stuff, but they're into saying things like, oh, everything is energy. We're all just energy. Interestingly, like I said, first quadrant, sense, perception, response, awareness. It is based on energy, from energy stimuli from your environment. This is what they sense, they perceive this, they respond in accordance to it. And this is their awareness, their conscious perception. Awareness is conscious perception. And, it leads to self-awareness, like I said. Awareness encompasses all of these, but also it's different. Not all creatures are self-aware. And like I said, it points to belief. Talking more about the INTP, I just want to say, I was talking to my dad and I told him that, it's not to be arrogant, it's not to, not to be arrogant or anything, but I told him, I think, I came up with the theory of everything. I know the theory of everything, right? It came to me. And he's saying, how could you come up with the theory of everything? He says you get lost driving to, a market or stuff. How could someone like you, who can't even do these simple tasks, come up with a theory of everything? You didn't believe me. Well, this is actually common among INTPs. Like Einstein, one time he called his wife. He said he was supposed to be at a meeting. He was late. INTPs tend to be late a lot. And he said, "Where am I and where are you?" He didn't know where he was at. He didn't even know where she was at. This is common among INTPs. Here, another example, my dad was like, how could you come up with the theory of everything? He said, when we would go shopping, you couldn't even pick out what shoe you can't even tell what's a good shoe. He's like, remember whenever we would go out to get shoes, you would make me pick out the shoes for you. And I was like, yeah, this is another thing that is common among INTPs. I'm not able to tell style a lot. So like when I would go to Foot Locker and I'd look at the shoes, I need my dad to tell me what shoe is a good shoe because I can't tell it all. I just look and I think, I don't know, does that look good, Dad? He says, yeah, this one looks good. No, this one doesn't look good. I can't tell that. My dad's an SJ. He can tell things like this. SJs are more into appearances and stuff like that. I'm not able to tell fashion type of stuff that well. I guess I can tell if something looks ridiculous, but most of the time I don't even notice. Okay, so we have these quadrants. Okay, so back to, I just wanted to get that out of the way, talk about that a little bit more. So back to, so we were talking about biology. I forgot to mention physics. We moved all the way to biology. I forgot to mention another thing in physics. We have the four forces, the strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force, electromagnetism, and gravity. Physicists say, okay, well, once again, strong nuclear force, weak nuclear force, we have a duality, electromagnetism, we have the triad, and then gravity, the quadrant. Physicists say that they can combine strong, weak, and electromagnetic into one force under the quantum mechanics. So once again, the first three, they're all interconnected. They said that all these used to be one force, but then they all separated, kind of like these. Remember I said that biologists think that all these life forms used to be one life form, and then they separated. Well, same thing with this. And they say that they can combine the first three, but they, under quantum mechanics, but they say gravity cannot be combined with quantum mechanics. They need general relativity to describe gravity, but quantum mechanics and general relativity, they say they're mutually exclusive. They're different. They can't combine them. But under M theory, like I said, they can be combined. And so basically, these are all the same thing, aspects of the same thing. These are all versions of the same thing. And if you think about it, according to general relativity, gravity is caused by warping of space-time by matter. Well, matter doesn't exist without the strong, weak, and electromagnetic forces. So gravity doesn't exist without all these. Gravity is separate, but it encompasses all of them. Then, once again, there's a possible fifth force that they say. They call it the quintessent force. And they say it's dark matter, maybe like dark energy type of thing. But people question if this is true, if there really is this fifth force. Some people say, no, this fifth force is actually not really a fifth force. It's actually just gravity. But we have to rethink our equations of gravity, and we don't understand gravity well enough. So remember, I always say, the fourth and the fifth, the fourth always points to the fifth. But there's a lot of evidence that there is a fifth force. So there's debate, but evidence indicates that there is definitely the fifth force. So we have, once again, the same pattern. The duality, the triad, the quadrant, then we get the pentad. I mentioned the atmosphere. I forgot to talk about, this is under chemistry. I forgot to talk about how there's the four main layers of the atmosphere: the troposphere, the stratosphere, the mesosphere, and the thermosphere. It takes the same pattern. The troposphere, which would be the first quadrant, that's where we live. Then the stratosphere has ultraviolet, it blocks ultraviolet radiation. It has an ozone layer. Remember, the second layer is always protection, homeostasis. Without the second layer, we wouldn't survive. Then the mesosphere. Remember, the third layer is always physical. It's always, remember, doing. Doing is physical. Well, the third layer is always physical, and the mesosphere is so cold that it's solid because it's basically ice crystals are in the mesosphere, so it's a solid layer of the atmosphere, and it's different than the other two. So once again, we have the same pattern. Then we get to the thermosphere. Remember, the thermosphere always is kind of different. Oh, I forgot. I just remembered a different one I wanted to talk about. But okay, so the thermosphere is always different. There's so little matter in the thermosphere. They call it like rarefied gas. Each particle is miles away from every other particle, so it seems like there's nothing there. Once again, the fourth quadrant seems like there's nothing there, but there is a fourth quadrant, the thermosphere. Then once again, we have the exosphere, which is even stranger, but the fifth. The exosphere is, really, really different. But we have the same pattern. This pattern is seen in all things. I'll just draw it out so you can see. We have troposphere, stratosphere, mesosphere, thermosphere, and then, exosphere. Most people say there's just these four, but exosphere the possible fifth. And it's not about the number, it's about the pattern that's seen. Remember, the third quadrant, the mesosphere, is solid, the most solid part. You see the same pattern. The quadrant's always trying to express itself in nature, so we can know the quadrant, the cross model, the quadrant model of reality. Let's see. What was I going to talk about? Oh yeah, the phases of matter. Let's look at the phases of matter. We have gas. Now, I've heard someone say, these phases are, these aren't really, there's no real phases of matter. If you look at it, there's, when something is solid and it's turning to liquid, it's kind of both solid and liquid. They don't know what they're talking about. There actually is discrete phases of matter. Something is either a gas, a liquid, a solid, or plasma. There's these four phases of matter. Gases adhere to their container. Liquids adhere to their container. First quadrant, right? They're conservative. They fit with their environment. Solid is an individual. It does its own thing. Plasma. Plasma is kind of like a combination of all of these. Stars are plasma. It's essentially, I guess, matter that has its electrons off of it or something. I don't know. It's complex. I used to be able to describe it when I knew about it better, but I described it a long time ago. I don't remember exactly what plasma is, but it kind of has qualities of all these. It has qualities of liquid, gas, and solid. So there's these discrete four phases of matter. Interestingly, once again, a fifth phase was thought to be found with, they call it, I think, Bose-Einstein condensate. It's basically solid light, condensed light, so they can make light solid. Once again, it seems the fifth is kind of godly. They call this Bose-Einstein condensate. But really, in our world, naturally, there's these four. The fifth is always unnecessary. It takes a laboratory to make Bose-Einstein condensate. So my grandma's talking, so I can't really think right now too well. All right. So I was talking about, we were on biology. Let's just look at eukaryotes to see how this fits the model. So within the family of eukaryotes, we have plants, fungi, animals, and protists. Plants, first quadrant, they get the sunlight, they're kind of weird, they sit still. Fungi, second quadrant, they're homeostasis, they eat up the detritus. Detritus is dead matter. They keep things clean. Animals, they're killing, they're doing crazy stuff like that. They're the doers, they're jumping around, they're, Darwinism, they're having sex with each other, they're the doers. And then the protists. The protists are a distinct eukaryote, but the interesting thing is there's plant-like protists. They even call them this. There's plant-like protists, there's fungi-like protists, and there's animal-like protists. The fourth is separate but encompasses the previous three. Again, there's also a fifth type of eukaryote, which is basically just a protist without, I guess with a different type of cell wall or something, I forget. But remember, the fourth always points to the fifth. All right. Let's look at the human body, because remember in Genesis it says that man is made in the image of God. Well, let's look at how the body reflects the quadrant, the cross. So let's start off. Remember we talked about sensation, perception, response awareness. Let's talk about our sensations. What are our senses? We have seeing, hearing, touch, taste, and smell. You have to remember that I have a heuristic that I use. I think it works. Where you have the light, the word, the flesh, the true word, and the true light. This is a way that things are just patterned. The light would be the eyes, the seeing. The word would be the hearing. The flesh is the touching. I got this from Genesis. I mean, not Genesis, from John. The true word is taste, and I think of speech, the mouth, taste, the true word. And remember, I said the second and fourth quadrants, these are always connected. So the person speaks and the person hears it. We have hearing as the second quadrant, and speaking or taste is the fourth quadrant. Then we have the fifth quadrant, the one in humans that is really kind of absent. We don't have a very good sense of smell. The fifth is always kind of seems unnecessary. If I had to get rid of one sense, I would definitely not mind not having a sense of smell. Although people say it's important for memory. But so we have the fifth one is smell. So we have the quadrant with our senses. The fourth and fifth are connected. You know how what you taste affects, or what the smell of something affects how it tastes. The first three are electromagnetic senses. I guess not. I forget what they're called, but they're mechanical senses is what they're called. And the fourth and the fifth, taste and smell, are both chemical senses, so they're different. Remember, the first three are always very similar, and then the fourth is kind of different. Now, also, there's a lot of illusions. So there's one illusion where if you see somebody moving his mouth and you hear him saying something, the way that somebody's moving his mouth, the way you see it affects how you hear it. There's all these illusions that can be made. I forget exactly what they're called, and I don't want to get into them too much, but these are all very interconnected. Our senses are connected with each other. Even our ears are connected to our mouths, and our nose is connected to our mouth. So if you hold your nose and you blow, you'll feel your ears kind of pop. If you snort, you'll get mucus in your mouth. These are all connected. We'll talk about seeing. I relate this stuff. It's fascinating. So remember, I was saying that there's truth to religion. Well, even Jacob, when he was naming his sons, his first 4 sons, he says, I forgot to talk about the planets. After this, hopefully, talk about the planets. But when he's talking about his first 4 sons, he says, the first son, he named him so-and-so because he saw him or something. And the second one was because he heard something. The third one was because it was something about feeling. And then the fourth one was because he said something. the taste. So we see the quadrant even in the Bible. And then, then he has 4 other sons with another wife. And then 4 sons with you. So it's the same type of quadrant model you see. So seeing, let's look at the eye. We have the ganglion cells, bipolar, horizontal, and amacrine cells. We have the quadrant again. These go to the photoreceptors. The photoreceptors send signals to your brain, to the occipital lobe, and it makes a chiasmus across as it goes to there. No one knows why it makes a chiasmus. They just say, oh, it's just random. No, it's because there's always an attempt to show the cross in nature. Even our right side of our brain controls our left side of the body. The left side controls the right. It's to represent this cross. There is no reason other than that. This quadrant. Interestingly, too, there's 4 lobes of the brain. The occipital lobe is for vision. We'll get to this. But we have occipital for vision, temporal for hearing, and social stuff. So also, fascinatingly, the temporal lobe has an area that people call the God area, and where people who have this area activated tend to be more religious. And remember, I said that the second quadrant is always related to religiosity. The third lobe is the parietal lobe, which is responsible for actions, doing things. And the frontal lobe is responsible for speech. Remember, the fourth is speech. And reasoning, and remember, the fourth quadrant is responsible for reasoning. The rationals, and knowing, and contemplating, passion, flowing. And also it encompasses all these other parts. So there's a part of the frontal lobe that's responsible for hearing, and it kind of encompasses every other part too. So, but back to the seeing, the signals cross this chiasmus, and then they're hit the occipital lobe, and then this is interpreted by the brain through perceptions as what we see. Remember, you can't always trust your senses, though. What you see isn't actually what is in reality in a lot of ways. I can go on and on about parts of the brain. Every part of the brain fulfills the quadrant, or everything fulfills the quadrant, but I'll just say some quick things. You have the 4 ventricles, and this is what some philosophers thought was where your soul was. There's a lot of examples. Hopefully I can get to that stuff later, but you have the carotid arteries, the 4 ones that bring blood to your brain. There's a lot of examples. Okay, so we have seeing. Then we have hearing, the second quadrant. When you hear, people say that you get a lot of different sound waves from your environment. We would get to the reason why. There's even more interesting things than this, but we get to it, hopefully. But you get sound waves from your environment. And you gather all these mechanical waves, and somehow your hair cells in your ear interpret this as a sound. An interesting thing is hearing is more social than seeing. Second quadrant is always more social. People say that it's actually worse to lose your hearing than to lose your sight because of the problems that it gives you socially. But a lot of people actually without hearing, though, are very happy. And they don't want, there's these things where these cochlear devices that make it so they can hear, but a lot of people who are deaf, when they get these, they don't like it. They'd rather be deaf. It's pretty interesting. But so hearing. We have hearing, and I learned in my psychology class, there's 4 parts of the ear. If you look at the inner ear, or if you look at the ear, there's actually 3 hair cells called the inner hair cells, and a 4th called the outer hair cell. And these are responsible for all your hearing. Remember the quadrant. We have the 3 hair cells, very similar, and then the 4th, which is different. Also, within the ear, there's vestibular sense, which is responsible for your balance. Remember, the 2nd quadrant is responsible for homeostasis, the maintenance of order. There's no coincidence that your sense of balance is within your ear where hearing is, the 2nd quadrant. Some people say that this is a 6th sense, some people say it's not. But if it was, it wouldn't make any difference because, remember, taste leads to smell. And then if you said that there was a 6th sense, it would be your sense of balance, and that would be the 2nd quadrant of the 2nd quadrant. And the 2nd quadrant of the 2nd quadrant is the most into order. We're going to get to that more later, hopefully. Then you have touch. We have 4 mechanoreceptors responsible for all our feeling, all our sense of touch. It takes the same pattern. Some people say that there's a 5th too, but there's really mainly 4. Once again, same pattern. Taste. What are our tastes? We have bitter. I'll say sweet, bitter, bittersweet, the duality. Sour, the triad. Remember the bad one, the sour one. And we have salty. Salty kind of encompasses all of these. Salty has qualities of all of them if you think about it. And then you have a possible 5th that they just came up with, umami, monosodium glutamate. Think about this. What is salt? NaCl, sodium chloride. What is umami? Monosodium Na-glutamate. The 4th and 5th are always connected. We have sodium involved in both. Then we have these 3, the triad, the quadrad, and we have the pentad. Then we have the smell. There's 4 chambers in your nose. And once again, taste and smell are chemical senses. All right, so we have the pattern again with that. I forgot to mention, I skipped a part of physics that I wanted to mention. So we're going to go back to physics really quick and then hopefully get back to biology. So the planets, I like the planets because this is one that people tend to be interested in. We have 4 inner planets, the rocky planets. Mercury, Venus, Earth, educated, Mars, mother, then you have an asteroid belt which separates them, so we have the 1st quadrant. Then you have Jupiter, just, Saturn, served, Uranus, us, Neptune, 9. Then you have the comet belt, separating this quadrant. Pluto, pizzas. One second. I forgot the name of the other 2. I think it's Aries and Mackie Maker. I'll just say it like this. Aries, I could be wrong, but if I'm wrong, you could look it up. And Mackie Maker. I think that's the wrong name, but it's kind of like that. So let's look at how this fulfills the model. We have Mercury. Remember, the 1st quadrant is always different, weird. Mercury's a little tiny guy. He's near the sun, hot area. Has a lot of asteroid collisions on it. Tiny. He's going really fast around it. It's kind of weird. First quadrant. Venus. Venus is really pretty. If you look at Venus, Venus is named after a goddess, the goddess Venus, from the pagan Greek gods, or maybe it was the Roman. I don't know. Doesn't matter. But we got Venus. Really pretty looking, right? Actually, it's not so pretty. The atmosphere of Venus is sulfuric acid. It burns. It's pretty hot there. It seems really pretty, seems really nice, but you wouldn't want to go there. The reason why they say it's so hot is because they say it used to be like Earth, but it had a runaway greenhouse effect. So this is what the environmentalists say. They say, oh yeah, we don't want to become like Venus, which had a runaway greenhouse effect. Like I said, the second and third quadrant, they're always pretty connected. So then we have Earth. Earth is the doer. It has life on it. It has a lot of stuff going on. It's even moving all the time. It has these tectonic plates. It's alive almost. They're constantly moving around. It's the doer of the bunch. And then you have Mars. Apparently, scientists say that Mars used to have water and perhaps even had life. And some scientists suggest that life on Earth came from Mars. What they call, I forget the name, but it's something like Planet Genesis, I forget. But they say that life from Mars, or from Earth, came from asteroids from Mars that hit Earth. And they say a lot of evidence indicates this. It's up for debate. Doesn't really matter. So the thing about Mars is it used to be alive, but then it died. Right? The fourth quadrant, death. So these are the four, they call them the four inner rocky planets. Then there's an asteroid belt. Scientists say, well, what probably happened with this asteroid belt was probably maybe planets collided and it created an asteroid belt. Scientists come up with all these hypotheses. But when it comes down to it, really the truth is, the only reason why things exist is to reveal the form. So the reason why there's an asteroid belt here is so it's to demarcate the separation of this quadrant from the second quadrant. Now we're in the second quadrant. The gaseous planets. They're qualitatively different. They're called the gaseous planets. We have Jupiter. So we're in the second quadrant, right? The second quadrant is supposed to be homeostatic. It's nice, pretty. Jupiter, people used to call it like the god. It was named after the god Jupiter, and he's supposed to be the most important god. Remember, the fifth is always very important. But the thing about Jupiter is it seems really pretty. It has a little ring around it. Once again, like I say, the second quadrant, we're in the second quadrant, right? It's always pretty. It has a ring. But its main function, the great thing about Jupiter is it has, throughout its history, protected Earth. Because asteroids have always hit Jupiter rather than going through Jupiter and hitting Earth. Because Jupiter is so big, it's massive, it has a lot of gravity. So asteroids are attracted to it, and it protects these inner planets. Remember, the second quadrant is always protection. It protects. Even Kiersey says that the ISFJ, who's Jupiter, is called the protector. All right, then we have Saturn, the second quadrant of the second quadrant. The second quadrant of the second quadrant has to be the most pretty. Because the second quadrant is all about appearances. It's really pretty. I forgot to say too, Jupiter has 4 Galilean moons, and an asteroid once hit Jupiter. It broke into 16 pieces, no coincidence. It had the 3 circles that combined into one circle, representing, these were supposed to be meteorological events of tornadoes. it was just representing the form once again. Okay. Then we have Saturn. Saturn has the rings. It's super pretty. Second quadrant is the second quadrant. It's also really big like Jupiter. It's gaseous. So, the rings even fulfill the pattern. I'm not going to get into it too much, though. And, yeah, it also protects these planets because asteroids hit it. Then you have Uranus. Uranus also has a ring. It's also pretty, but Uranus starts to become solid. It has, although it's a gaseous planet, it also has a solid inner core. This is the third quadrant of second quadrant. Behavior. We're starting to get into a little bit of doing a little bit physical. So there's no wonder that there's a little bit of solid mass within Uranus. Then you have Neptune. It has even more solid mass within it, or it has solid mass too. Interestingly, people didn't even know Neptune existed until not too long ago. And the crazy thing is, even the discoveries of these things, I'm not going to get into it too much, but they even fulfill the pattern, the form. How they discovered Neptune. But that can be discussed hopefully later. Then you have the comet belt. So people say that Pluto actually isn't even a planet. It's a dwarf planet. And you have within it Pluto. So remember, the first quadrant and the second quadrant, they obey laws. They obey order. Remind me, I have to talk about the conic sections. But they all have this orbit that's in alignment. These orbits are in alignment with each other. They're nice. They don't, they're not individuals. They stick, they're conservative. They stick within these nice orbitals. Once you get to the third quadrant, Pluto says, screw you guys. Pluto says, I'm going to take a whole different orbit. And he goes like through all these guys and, just a crazy orbit. Different than all these guys. He's an individual. He's a thinker. Pluto's a thinker. Remember? So sensing would be Mercury. Perceiving would be Venus. Response, Earth. Awareness, Mother, Mars. Just served us 9. Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune. Pluto, thinker. Pizzas. So Pluto's an individual. He's doing his own thing. He says, you know what, I don't care about those nice little orbitals you first and second quadrant people are doing. I'm going to do my own thing. Then we have Eris, which is even more crazy than Pluto. Eris is so crazy. Actually, Eris goes within the orbits of these guys a little bit more. So remember, he's a second quadrant of the third quadrant. So he says, I'm going to obey the laws a little bit more. But he's still pretty crazy. Then you get the Mackey Maker, whatever his name is, I forget. He's the craziest. Because he's the third quadrant of the third quadrant. This guy doesn't want to follow authority. He says, screw authority. So even the planets fulfill the model. Fulfill the pattern. All right, so let's get back to the body. So we're back to biology now. Oh, shoot, all right. So we talked about the senses of the body. We talked about the lobes of the brain. I can get into okay, I'm just going to go over the easy stuff for now. So we got the 4 chambers of the heart. The Aztecs used to worship the heart because they said it represented, just the holy. There's the 4 chambers of the heart. The blood goes from this chamber to this chamber to this chamber to this chamber. Remember, the third encompasses the previous 2. The fourth encompasses them all. Then you got the stomach. The stomach is divided into 4 parts based on the different cells within the stomach. So you have the stomach is divided into 4 parts. And it goes down and down. You have the liver, which is divided into 4 parts. The 4th part is called like the quadrature. But the liver is divided into 4 parts. You have your neurons in your brain are divided into 4 parts. The dendrites, the axon, I think it's called the soma, and then dang it, I forget the names exactly. But look it up. The neuron is divided into 4 parts. Then you look at the kidney. The kidney is divided into 4 parts. The nephron of the kidney, which is the functional unit of the kidney, is divided into 4 parts. There's this part like this. Then there's a part that goes like this. Then there's a part that goes like this. And then there's a part that goes like this. Or not exactly like this. But it's divided into 4 parts. Doesn't matter. That's all it needs to know. That's all you need to know. And the 4th part always, like for the neuron, the 4th part points beyond itself. So the axon, what happens in your brain is there's these action potentials that send electrical signals through these axons, and then they go to the end of the neuron. Hold on a second. Yeah, they go to the end of the neuron, and then they hit the neurotransmitters, or then they release neurotransmitters, and these neurotransmitters signal the release of another action potential. Even neurotransmitters and everything fulfill the model. Okay, so here's the parts. There's the soma, the dendrites, the axon, and the axon terminals. Okay, those are the names. So the same thing. We got the pattern, the model. We got the 4 fingers and the 5th, which is the thumb. The form's always trying to show itself. Okay, here's another example. The lung. The lung has 3 parts, like this, and 2 parts like this. So we have the 3. Remember, the 3 are all interconnected. And then the 2 parts, the other 2 which are connected. We have the pattern shown. Biologists say that they have no idea why the lung is shaped this way. They can't imagine why, according to evolution, the lung would be this way. What's the advantage of having the lung like this? Well, I think it's just to represent the form. An example of how this relates to Genesis, you see the form throughout everything in religion. But in Genesis, it starts off with there's it's in the land. There's 4 rivers in the Garden of Eden, and then it goes, and then Abraham, he builds 4 wells, and each time someone tries to take his well, and then finally at the 4th well, the people are like, "Wow, Abraham, you're an awesome dude. Can we have an alliance with you?" And Abraham's like, "You know what? I'm gonna stick with my I don't really need to make alliances with you guys. Let me mind my business. You guys mind your own business. I got everything under control." And they're like, okay. We just want to be your friend. And then Abraham has to make a sacrifice, and he has to sacrifice, I forget what they were exactly, but something like some animal right here, another animal right here. They fit the characteristics of the first and second model. Then you have like a ram. So a ram, it's doer, it's physical, it's aggressive. And then he had to sacrifice 2 birds, a dove and a pigeon, something like that. I forget exactly. But once again, we have the 3 animals and the 2 birds, which are connected. And he didn't cut the 2 birds in half, which was a mistake. So we have the 3 connected and then the 2 birds. what I want to get at is myths. So religion has myths, and myths, people say myths aren't true. Myths are true because myths are metaphorical, and myths convey the truth metaphorically. So all the stories in the Bible, they convey the truth metaphorically. I've said this to somebody who was an SJ and he got offended. He was like, so you don't think that this stuff literally happened? If it makes you happy to think that this stuff really happened, then look at it this way. I told you that the physical nature of reality reflects the eternal reality. So it's possible that a lot of stuff really happened. Perhaps it's legendary, but it's possible. So whatever makes you happy. If it makes you happy to think that really happened, that's okay. That's cool. All right. So what else did I want to say? Okay, like look at the blood types. You have type A, type B, type AB, because in type AB encompasses A and B, because people with type AB can accept blood from people with type A and B. So we have the triad, the duality, the triad, and then you have type O. Well, O can accept, someone with type O blood can take blood or can give blood to all of these types. Type O blood can be accepted by people with all these types of blood. So O is separate, but it encompasses all of them. The fourth is always separate, but encompasses all of them. Hemoglobin, actual blood, has 4 parts to it. In the Bible, it says that blood is life. They really, you're not allowed to eat blood. Blood is important. It's interesting, Jesus says to eat his flesh and his blood by eating this is what he says in the Gospels, in the stories of the Gospels, to eat his flesh and the blood. So it's interesting because I've heard people say that, well, that's against the law to eat someone's blood because you're not allowed to eat blood in the first place. So it's kind of interesting. But yeah, blood has 4 parts to it. What else do I want to talk about? Yeah, so there's more, but the physical human body embodies the form a lot. Now, I've heard someone say, like, I was studying a bacterium, and the person was like, well, how does the bacterium fit the form? Look at how weird the bacterium looks. It doesn't fit the form. Of course it doesn't fit the form. It's not everything can fit the form exactly. But the bacterium does fit the form because, why? Because there's archaea, bacteria, eukaryotes, and the virus. That's the reason why bacteria exists, to fit the second quadrant. All right, so then we got psychology. So we moved from biology, now we're moving to the 4th quadrant, psychology. Talk about a few things. I want to talk about a few things, hopefully, with psychology. We have the big 5, which is for personality. It's the same pattern as all the other stuff. There's 4 parts of people's personalities that they say they use factor analysis, quote unquote, to discover these parts. And one part is openness. So this is how open you are to experience, to learning new things, right? The first quadrant. Learning. The mind. Remember I said the first quadrant is mind. Sensation, perception, response, awareness is all mental. It's all perceptions of the brain. So we have openness. Then we have conscientiousness. Conscientiousness is how organized you are, right? Second quadrant. Third quadrant, extroversion. It's different than how the Myers-Briggs model explains this stuff, but extroversion relates to how you do things, how you like to do things. Do you like to do things? How you like? Do you like a lot of stimulus? Do you not like a lot of stimulus? Introvert people would not like a lot of stimuli. So this is related to doing. Then you have agreeableness, the fourth one. Once again, the fourth always points beyond itself. It points outside itself. So this is how you relate to your environment and how you relate to other people. Are you an agreeable person? Do other people like to be around you? It's pointing beyond itself. It used to be the big four. For a long time, scientists said, or psychologists said, oh, we've only discovered 4 factors within our factor analyses. Well, then later, like I say, the 5th is always discovered, but it's questionable if this is a 5th. Some people say it's not actually a different factor because they say it's related to these other factors. The idea of these different factors is they're supposed to not affect each other. So someone's openness is not supposed to affect someone's conscientiousness too much, and so on and so forth. Actually, they do affect each other. Like I say, they're not completely separate, but they have to be pretty separate in order to be different functions. So neuroticism, some people say it's actually shouldn't be a different one, but then a lot of psychologists say, yeah, actually neuroticism is a 5th factor in personality. Let me look up what neuroticism means. I guess it just means how psychotic you are. I don't know exactly, but I think that agreeableness and neuroticism, agreeableness points to neuroticism. If someone's neurotic, how is he going to be agreeable? We got the same pattern involved. Let's look at Freud. Oh, let me just say, too, I forgot to mention this. So psychology, the history of psychology has been divided into, started off with psychoanalysis. Freud jump-started psychology with psychoanalysis. Psychoanalysis is weird. You have a person who has authority, he stands or he sits on his, bench or whatever, and then the other person's supposed to lay down, the person's supposed to tell his problems, and the person's supposed to be studying the subconscious, these supernatural type of things, first quadrant, right? And studying dreams, weird type of stuff. Then you have, I forget exactly what they named the different parts, but then you have humanism, and this is where people it was a backlash against psychoanalysis, where people started to say, you know what? There shouldn't be such a separation between the psychologist and the patient. So instead, there should be more, people should talk to the psychologist should be, on the equal footing with the patient, and they should be able to talk about things, and, there should be group therapy, and we should, family therapy, where we talk about our feelings. Second quadrant. This is second quadrant oriented. Then we have behaviorism. Then there was a backlash against this because people said this didn't work. Then we had behaviorism. Behaviorists said, you know what? Forget about the mind. It's all about just doing stuff. So we can't study the mind. We can only study how people behave. They even went so far as to say that there is no mind. So this is what the behaviorist said. It fits the model. Once again, it's all about doing behavior. So they study lab rats and things like this in order to gain ideas about psychology. And they study just the behaviors. They don't try to study the mind, what people say, because they say it's inaccurate. You can't know. They're actually wrong. Behaviorists are incorrect. But it was important that it went to the stage because it fulfills the model. So then we have, now there's evolutionary psychology, and psychology where they talk about consciousness. I could be getting this wrong, but study it yourself. They have the 4 stages. And basically here people start to study consciousness. They start to say that, but with evolutionary psychology, like I was saying, people look at the fact that, people are racist and they think that this might have to do with evolution. One example would be redheaded people. There's been suggestions that redheaded people are related in ways.
You covered that once before.
No, I didn't. And they're related to Neanderthals. Now, this is interesting because there's always been prejudice against redheaded people in history. Well, some evolutionary psychologists think, well, there has been genetic evidence indicating that redheaded people are related to Neanderthals, so that would make sense why there's prejudice. Well, they have genes that came from Neanderthals. Not all redhead, I guess a lot of redheaded people, but there could be people who are not redheaded who also have genes related to Neanderthals. But the idea is that there's this relationship, and this could explain why there's been prejudice against redheaded people. So there's things like this involved in evolutionary psychology. And it's a study of consciousness. I think I actually got this kind of wrong, but the way I got this, it was a teaching company course on psychology, and they talked about the 4 types, and I might have named them wrong, but this is the way it is. All right, so let's talk about Freud a little bit. Freud said that. Actually, let me go back to biology really quick. I forgot to mention. So we're going back to biology. We have DNA. What we have: A, C, G, and T. There's 4 bases in DNA. I think they're called nucleobases. There's only 4, and this makes up the genetic code for all humans. With these 4 bases, are the blueprints for how the body is supposed to be structured. Once again, the proteins are what perform the actions that create your body. But we're not going to get into all the details, but these are the 4 bases within your DNA. Once again, Watson and Crick kind of discovered this on accident. Things are always discovered kind of on accident. Through a lot of contemplation, and they come through a surprise. I forgot to mention this about science. Science, remember the first quadrant thing? A lot of times people say, oh, science is completely objective. Remember I said that the first quadrant is not objective at all? It's true about science too. People often say, oh yeah, we discovered these things through this analysis and we're completely objective, but really they're not. A lot of times people only see what they're looking for. But there is also some objectivity in science. But anyways, there's 4 bases in the DNA. ACGT. There's a possible 5th base, urine, but that's only in RNA. So once again, we have the 4 and a possible 5th. These bases make amino acids through these processes. We're not going to get into it too much. I'm not that great at explaining it, but they make amino acids, and then the amino acids the way that scientists show the amino acids is they draw 16 quadrants, and these amino acids can be placed in these 16 quadrants. There's 21 amino acids in the body. Now you're saying, oh, 21, that's not 16 or 17, 18, 19. How does that fit the form? Well, I studied the origins of life, science of the origins of life. And scientists say that there's a big hypothesis that originally there were only 4 amino acids. And then out of these, the other 21 came. But there was originally just 4 amino acids, from which all the other ones came later. So once again, we have the form. All right, so Freud said that there are five psychosexual stages it fits the form. He said the oral stage. He said in the oral stage, people are obsessed with chewing gum and things like this. People tend to be gullible, immature, manipulative, kind of first quadrant oriented. The second stage, Freud points out as he says, remember I said first quadrant is gullible. And also I forgot to mention that the first quadrant sometimes lies a lot. Because, they talk about the supernatural stuff and they kind of sometimes want to be important. So they'll say like, oh yeah, I saw aliens, and they say these things, they're not telling the truth, but they trick a lot of people. The funny thing is though, I'm going to get to this later, but okay. Sometimes you wonder though. So then you have anal stage. People in this stage are, it's about organization. Once again, the second quadrant. So if people get stuck in this stage, Freud says they become obsessively organized later in life, or sometimes if bad things happen in this stage, they can be the opposite. So this has to do with organization. Then you have the phallic stage, and Freud says that in this stage, boys start to become obsessed with their penises, and there really is evidence that indicates that Freud's stages are correct. And he says that boys start to want to have sex with their mothers at this stage. And he says that girls, and actually Jung said this, that girls start to want to have sex with their dads in this stage because he calls it penis envy. That they want to have a penis, and by having sex with their dad, that would be like them getting a penis. He says that this is later fixed in life by the women. They have their own son. And then there's that desire for them to have sex with their son in order to gain their son's penis. It's kind of funny stuff. But once again, phallic, it's kind of doing. People always look at the third quadrant as bad. Thinking, emotion, doing, dreaming. Some people like it. They think it's cool, but also there's the negative connotations. The ego is involved with it. Then the fourth stage is the latency stage. Again, the latency. Latency connotes that there's not much going on. In this stage, there's dormant sexual feelings. So it's about sex. Remember I said that knowledge in the Bible connotes sex. When people know somebody, then they have sex with them. Well, the fourth one, this is also about sex. So Freud says if a person does not receive sexual fulfillment in this stage, then later in his life he'll have difficulties. Then you have, he says, the genital stage, which has to do with relationships. So we're getting into the next quadrant, the second quadrant. Remember, the second quadrant is always about relationships. The first quadrant and the second quadrant. I think that's good for now. I'm going to hopefully continue more in a bit.